What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Teach Me Magic, where every episode features an expert guest, deck tech, and gameplay video as they guide us through a league with their best deck. This was intended to be just one video, but because of the amount of great detail that just went into the deck tech, I wanted to separate the two. I'll have the link to part 2 in the description below. If you're just getting into Eldrazi, or you've been playing the deck for a while now, there's a ton of useful information we go over in this deck tech. So today I'm joined by an Eldrazi expert who goes by the name Giltspire on Magic Online. He's well known in the Magic community for playing modern leagues and challenges, all while collecting data in order to find that perfect list.
Hey, what is up, guys? This is Mark, aka Giltspire. You may know me from my videos over on YouTube, as well as my posts over on Discord, if you are a member of the Eldrazi Tron Discord server, where I have specialized in both Eldrazi Tron, as well as recently Eldrazi Ramp. One of my most memorable achievements is qualifying for multiple RCs, as well as the MOCs. It's been a fun time this last Modern season through all the ups and downs that the meta presents. And you can find me over on YouTube, as I mentioned, over on Twitter, Blue Sky, and hopefully later this year over on Twitch as well.
Today we are playing Eldrazi Ramp. The deck has become like kind of stock overall, but definitely a few changes, especially recently with the new Tarkir set that just came out. So let's go over the deck a little bit, talk about some of the cards that we're running, talk about that we're running actually 61 cards today, which you don't often see in Eldrazi. Yeah, let's start with the lands. Why are we running these utility lands or these specific lands today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the lands here, specifically Bojuka Bog, really is meant for graveyard hate. You know, modern with energy. You see Flage a ton. There are a ton of artifact-based decks that run Emery, so you really do want some way to interact with your opponent's graveyard, especially in the mirror match as well. Bojuka Bog comes in clutch in trying to reduce the Delirium count for Emrakul, the Promised End. In addition to that, the deck just allows for such flexibility to run so many different utility lands between Bojuka Bog, between Cavernous Souls, if you're worried about, the consigned to memories, blanking your creatures, whether it be counter spells and Dimir Murktide, whether it be against control, etc. We also have utility lands like Gemstone Caverns, which is probably one of my favorite additions. We found the data for the play draw with my data being presented to be really bad on the draw. I mean, most decks are bad on the draw, and we tried to find a way to bridge that gap and bring the win rate of play versus draw closer together. And Gemstone Caverns has proven to be a indispensable piece of utility in that effort. And so it's always one of those fun things to find on that turn 1, on that turn 0, really, of pregame actions. And it can get some really spicy lines where you can get even a kicked Mycospawn on turn 2.
Oh, wow. I've never kicked a Mycospawn on turn 2, but I would love to do that.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. It's pretty backbreaking for your opponent to be like, okay, I have my one land. And you're like, haha. Well, how about you go to 0?
Insane.
Yeah, it can be pretty insane what you can do with sowing Mycospawn and Gemstone Caverns. Similarly to that, Ghost Quarter, if we're talking about land destruction, Ghost Quarter is a favorite of mine for a few reasons. A, Belcher is becoming more prevalent, as is Amulet Titan, and Ghost Quarter is a great way to interact with both of those decks. Though another thing that I do enjoy doing with it is that since it is a May ability to search your library for a basic land card, if I do have Ghost Quarters up and I'm taking control of my opponent's turn with Emrakul, the Promised End, I can always choose not to, so it really does act as a strip mine in that regard. So it is kind of an interesting card. It has a lot of flexibility, though when it isn't relevant, can always be sided out. So really interesting usage with Ghost Quarter. Doesn't see some of the best results in every match, but when it does, it is pretty standout. Sanctum of Ugin, next utility land to kind of talk about. This really is your kind of answer all of, I don't have another Haymaker coming up, but I have my 7 mana value spell, or I have Sowing Mycospawn, which can fetch for Sanctum of Ugin. Sanctum of Ugin can fetch you for World Breaker, Null Drifter, all of your Eldrazi, and even some sideboard pieces like Soulless Jailer in a pinch. I have definitely fetched for Soulless Jailer in matchups like Amulet Titan, or back when Grinding Station was still a deck, as it can really just shut off a lot of what these decks are trying to do with interacting with cards that are either in exile or in the graveyard. So Signet of Ugin, really great utility land to utilize, especially as all of these can be fetched with Soin Mycospawn. Not much more else to say about the utility lands. The land or mana base is pretty standard for Eldrazi. You have your 8 soul lands in the way of Eldrazi Temple, as well as Ugin's Labyrinth. The fact that we now have access to 8 copies of these soul lands is pretty significant and is really what has given this deck life. Between that, the thing that really makes Eldrazi Ramp stand out from, let's say, Eldrazi Tron is the reliance on forest or forest land type cards like Gemstone Cavern, Breeding Pool, etc. And then, of course, we have our fetches, which allow us to find these forest basic land types. Being able to play 9 copies basically makes Utopia Sprawl kind of like Ugin's Lab number 5 through 8, and kind of acts as Soul Lands number 9 through 12, right? It comes into play tapped, but I mean, you can't really complain with a tapped Soul Land on turn 1 when you can untap turn 2 with 4 mana. So the mana base is really what drives the deck forward and has given it its power that you now see. And then obviously that's all backed up by these huge mid-range Eldrazi that can just kind of grind out value throughout the game.
It's actually crazy. Like, I guess I never really thought about Utopia Sprawl being like the, 9 through 12 soul land. It, again, tapped. We're a ramp deck. We don't mind just kind of setting up to hit our top end. So it's really no big deal.
That was one of the reasons why I swapped from Tron to Ramp, as I started thinking about Utopia Sprawl more and more, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized, oh, it's just Ugin's Lab, but tapped on turn 1. And then, of course, throughout the rest of the game, it is most often going to be mana neutral, where you can attach Utopia Sprawl to a forest using another green source, so you have 2 green sources, kind of ends up mana neutral for the turn, but the following turn, you've, ramped for 2 instead of just 1. So it's really interesting to kind of think about Utopia Sprawl in these really unique scenarios, especially with just the fact that we're running 3 colors, but only running, 1 breeding pool, 1 stomping ground, and of course our surveil land in commercial district, though, depending on who you ask, that might be a commercial district, might be a hedge maze. For me, I like having access to the red source because Kozilek's Return is such an important part of the deck, at least as of right now, with energy being as prevalent as it is.
Yeah, definitely. What's also cool, I think, like other than the ramp and why people hate this deck is because it shuts off or it kind of slows down the hate. So Harbinger, Blood Moon, if you get that forest and Utopia Sprawl in the forest, it's like, cool, we don't care. And we can just kind of play through it for the most part.
Yep, exactly. It's much more resilient to land hate, whether it be Charmal, White Orchid Phantom, Vindicate, Molten Rain. There's plenty of it, let me tell you, and people have been boarding in a ton as of recent. And that resiliency really is what also pushed me from Tron to Ramp, as now we just kind of go, okay, sure, you interact with my lands. They're now tapping for different mana. That's whatever. That's fine. You can still generate the colors that we need in order to advance our game plan.
For sure. We have the lands. We have Utopia Sprawl. So our 2 drops, we have Malevolent Rumble, which before we started recording, we were talking about Rumble not really putting up the numbers, and my argument is, so it puts things in the graveyard, which helps Emrakul. So these are all the things people are going to say. It helps fuel Emrakul. It creates that colorless source, just in case you need that under Blood Moon or some other effect. And it's just like card selection. So why isn't Rumble putting up the numbers like we would imagine they would?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my intro, I am a data-based deck builder, so I'm utilizing data from my games to kind of make deck building decisions. It is kind of unique and a bit of a different approach than most people do. A lot of people, kind of go by the feels of like, well, this feels good, this is trying to accomplish my goal. But by using data, we've kind of determined that Malevolent Rumble hasn't actually been doing all too well. We kind of have our hypotheses as to why, but haven't figured out the exact reason. That being said, we have kind of looked at it and went, well, yes, it does ramp us. Yes, it does get us towards Emrakul. But both those cards kind of not really working out all too well in the current meta. So we are looking towards other cards in that 2-drop slot.
So we have Rumble in our 2 slot. We have 4 Talismans. We have a split here with Curiosity and Impulse. Let's talk about why we're splitting. And we used to just have all Impulse for that red effect, but now we have Null Drifter and Consign in the sideboard.
Yeah, the Talisman split has always been a bit contentious because you always want to have access to both, but you're really trying to prioritize red, especially in the aggressive meta. So it definitely is difficult to figure out the exact balance, but from our testing, it seems like a 2-2 split has performed well. Of course, if you're not running Consigned to Memory or Null Drifter, then you can probably just go for a full Talisman of Impulse instead. But yeah, I mean, you want to be able to generate both colorless as well as red and green and blue. So the Talismans have, definitely played a huge part in the ramp that the deck provides. Not to mention that it is playable on turn 1 under Ugin's Labyrinth, which is definitely a significant power play, allowing you to generate upwards of 5 mana on turn 2. So being able to do that more consistently definitely has been a boon to the deck. And something that I've considered with Malevolent Rumble going down in numbers is potentially even adding more talismans.
Yeah, and in other lists, I've definitely run upwards to 6, just because for all the reasons why talismans are good. They tap for the colors you need, they tap for colorless, and they help against Blood Moon, Harbinger, etc., just like Utopia Sprawl. And it does feel good playing that on turn 1 with Ugin's Lab and kind of popping off that way. All right, so 3 drops. We talked about how Boros Energy is the most played deck in the current meta right now, sitting at like all the data I see as like upwards of like 15+% on Goldfish or just like meta shares and all that. So Kozilek's Return, definitely a welcome main deck card, right?
Yeah, I mean, right now, Energy, I think in the last 7 days has like a 22 some odd meta percent share, and there are other aggressive decks being tested right now with Prowess. So Kozilek's Return, I think, is a must-have in Eldrazi. I know there's been some testing being done of Mono Green with All Is Dust instead, but Kozilek's Return has just proven itself time and time again to be a fantastic addition, being able to deal 2 damage across the board. And then, of course, if you cast a Eldrazi creature spell, and creature is the important part there, some people do forget about that. You're able to deal 5 damage across the board, which can take out everything from a Kappa Cannoneer that hasn't been buffed too much, to all of the Guide of Souls and other creatures that have been floated with it. So Kozilek's Return, definitely a really impactful card, really important to have in the deck, as right now without it, you're kind of falling a bit behind the aggressive decks.
Yeah, and to pair along with Kozilek's Return, we're going to just keep talking about Null Drifter, but since we're talking about K-Return, the evoke cost. So actually, this is another argument for Rumble. Rumbling Kozilek's Return feels so good when you have Rumble, when you have a Drifter.
Yeah, I mean, that is one thing that I'm not sure about when it comes to switching off of Rumble, but the ability to Rumble over a K-Return, have a K-Return into the yard, and then evoking a Null Drifter, it's really important. While, yes, you're casting for alternative casting cost of 3, Null Drifter's converted mana cost or mana value is 7, which will then trigger Kozilek's Return. So a really easy way to just sweep the board by evoking in a pinch. Hell, I've even had times where I will cast Kozilek's Return for 3 and then evoke Null Drifter for 3 as well for a total of 6 mana. And so basically it is a draw 2, deal 7 damage to the board, and it has come in clutch a lot of times. So I mean, Kozilek's Return, Null Drifter, there's a reason why that tech is used and why Null Drifter is seeing such amount of play in the Teamer version. I mean, yes, it's a divination, but being able to trigger Kozilek's Return for 3 mana is really, really important.
Definitely. Again, especially with the aggressive meta there is right now. So we'll move on to usually like the main star, or who used to be the main star when Breach was popular, but we're only running 3 Karn the Great Creator, not the usual set that you would see. What's kind of like the thought process behind 3 versus 4 in this current meta?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I've been on 3 for a while on MTGO. When I went to the recent RC in Seattle, I still ran 3, but in retrospect, should have ran 4. But realistically speaking, Karn is one of those cards where when you want to see them, you want to see at least 1 per game. In your affinity matchup, in your matchup against Brood-Scale, Belcher, you want to see at least 1 copy. And so that's where we can run 3. Running 4 sometimes into energy can kind of feel bad, especially in multiples, as Karn doesn't do as much there, or when it does do a lot, it's usually because you already have advantage in some way, shape, or form. And so 3 is kind of that sweet spot where you don't see Karn all too often, but you see him enough when you need him, especially with that card selection in the way of Rumble, as well as Kozilek's Command, giving you that ability to search through your deck. 3 has been a sweet spot for me. I could see an argument for dropping a Writhing Chrysalis, for example, and moving up to 4 in an instance that artifact decks do see more meta share, though as their numbers do continue to increase, whether it be Hardened Scales, Brood Scale, Belcher, etc. I mean, we might be back in a artifact-centric meta soon where 4 might be necessary.
And it's tough too, because I mean, all those cards do different things. Like if you want to, like we can talk about with the one of Writhing Chrysalis. So that's here. Energy's popular. It just helps kind of slow the game down and also create that ramp so that way we can hit our top end a lot more quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Think of Writhing Chrysalis kind of as a 5th Myco spawn, just doesn't have the kick ability attached to it because most often Soy Myco spawn is going to be grabbing an Eldrazi Temple or an Ugin's Lab and imprinting. So you're ramping for 2 in many of those cases. Writhing Chrysalis kind of acts in a similar way, but in a pinch can also be used as a 4/5 blocker with reach. So great into NG, as you mentioned, because it allows you to go a bit wider, blocking, let's say, Ocelot Pride, a floated Guide of Souls, or a Charmaw. You know, it does cost you a bit of mana to do so if you do need to sack the spawns in response to, but Writhing Chrysalis has been a pretty good card overall, though definitely recently has seen some worse results, hence why I was more than happy to cut 3 Writhing Chrysalis to re-add Karn back into the list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I remember when I guess people started playing this card, it was like a 2 of, then up to a set, and then the numbers kind of bounced here and there.
Yeah, Writhing Chrysalis has seen an interesting journey since Prague. Yeah, because initially it was a 2 of, then people put 2 in the sideboard, then moved up to a 3 of, and yeah, it's been interesting to see the journey of this limited all-star come to modern constructed.
Yeah, limited Pauper all-star too. Just like people, just Pauper players hate this card. And then yeah, we talked about Myco Spawn. This is another card where people just like loathe it. It was banned in Legacy for being too powerful. Obviously, we don't have Wasteland to do all like the intense land destruction, but Myco Spawn does everything we need in terms of slowing the game down, ramping us, and it's just a 3/3 body, can chump. So it just really does everything, in my opinion.
Yeah, Myco Spawn, I mean, it really is kind of the glue that holds the deck together because, like you said, you have that ramp, you have the ability to get rid of a land, and you also have the 3/3 body, because when you break down kind of each individual piece of the deck, I mean, you're looking at, there's no real good comparison for the search because it puts on the battlefield. The closest thing is you have like a Sorcerer Speed Archdruid's Charm, which is 3 mana in comparison. But in reality speaking, you're kind of getting a 3/3 for 2 mana, and then a 2 mana Sylvan Scrying that puts it onto the battlefield untapped. And then the kicker is basically just a Sinkhole, but with colorless mana instead. I mean, the card is consistently above rate no matter how you look at it. It's just a fantastic card and understandably the bane of people's existence.
And it plays really well into Consigned to Memory being the most popular sideboard card right now, and everyone's running a set. So this having 3 triggers, it's like, what do you want to deal with right now?
Yep, yeah, a lot of times with Consigned to Memory, unless they just are playing into open mana, I mean, they're going to be giving me a 3/3 body at the very least, which is going to start putting pressure on their life total. So Myco Spawn, 10 out of 10 card, no notes, and hopefully they never bring Wasteland to Modern.
And then moving on to our top end, we have a lot of top end. We'll start with 2 Worldbreaker. So this card has been, I'd say again, in and out of kind of popularity, going from 1 to, if you're mono green or just Gruul, to like a set of 4. Here we only have 2. Why are we choosing 2 for today?
Yeah, I mean, realistically speaking, Worldbreaker is currently, I want to say, the 3rd or 2nd best performing Eldrazi in the deck, and it's kind of consistently been at that level. I mean, it's a 5/7 blocker with reach, and reach in this meta seems really important, especially with Guide of Souls. There's just a lot of incidental flyers that can deal a lot of damage if left unchecked. And so that 5/7 reach definitely comes into play. But the fact that it is 7 mana, which triggers Kozilek's Return once again, but also is able to destroy a artifact, a enchantment or land, or rather exile them, is really important. And on top of which has that recursion. I think that last part is kind of not really thought of very often, but the fact that it is able to bring itself back to your hand for 3 mana as well as sacrificing land is quite significant. I mean, there are a lot of times where I have access to 10 mana and I'm like, cool, I have nothing to play, but I have a Worldbreaker Engrave. Cool, let me just tap 3, sack a land, cast it for 7, and my opponent just goes, okay, well, I'm going to eat another land that's going to go And if you want to counterspell it, cool. If I draw into another land, I can just do it all over again. So the recursion is actually pretty relevant in the late game where it gets a bit grindy in those control matchups. And in those aggressive matchups as well. I mean, World Breaker is just a significant body for them to deal with.
Definitely. And again, I'm going to keep saying another argument for Rumble. You mill over World Breaker and your opponent like forgets about it. And you're like, end of turn, just bring that back.
Yeah, like you say, Rumble presents a lot of good arguments for it. Just the question that we just haven't been able to answer when it comes to our data analysis, like why is Rumble not performing well? And that's the part that we can't figure out. So we'll do some testing, see if some other cards perform better in comparison, and then we might be able to deduce a reason why Rumble's not performing well.
So we talked about Null Drifter. Was there anything additional to say about Null Drifter? It has the Evoke. If we ever do hardcast it, I feel like we're not often hardcasting it, but it's kind of like a luxury to do that, but it still does a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, worst comes to worst, turn 2, you can evoke it to draw 2 cards if you have nothing else going on. If you do end up casting it, you do have a 4/4 flying with Annihilator 1. The Annihilator can definitely be relevant. Not always, but sometimes. But the fact that it does have flying, again, is the relevant part on it, I'd say. You know, whether it be Writhing Chrysalis, World Breaker, Null Drifter, Sire, 7 Deaths, as we'll get to later, just that ability to block flying creatures is really relevant in this meta, whether that be for energy, whether that be for zoo. A lot of just incidental flyers that can do a lot of work, where these creatures can at least block them, whereas your Myco Spawns or Devour Destinies just really aren't able to do so, and thus they're able to threaten your life total, where you're kind of just sitting there going, okay, what do I do now? So Null Drifter, really important card for the deck. Again, able to re-trigger Kozilek's Return, draw you a few cards, and of course, being 7 mana value or greater is fodder for Ugin's Labyrinth.
The next 7-drop, like we mentioned, Sire of 7 Deaths. I've heard nothing but good things in the Discord, on social media. Just like this card is absurd if you can land it. So do you also agree?
There's not much else to say.
Yeah.
It has 7 different texts on it. Like, as the name says, Sire 7 Deaths. You'll die in 7 different ways from this card. It is just an absolute menace, quite literally. As once it lands on board, most decks just don't have an efficient way to deal with it. I mean, as Solitude, they pay 7, they gain you 7, and they also have to most times evoke it in order to deal with it. So they're out 2 cards and a 14 life point, gap as well. So it's kind of insane in that regard. But even then, a lot of decks just don't have a clean way to deal with it. So once it lands on board, you're able to just infinitely block. It has Vigilance. It has Trample and First Strike. There's not much else to say about it. It's just a really impressive card. I'm kind of disappointed I hadn't tested it earlier, though, as we did, kind of look at the data. I don't think it would have survived well in the grinding station meta, but now that grind station is no longer an issue, Sire 7 Deaths definitely would not leave home without 2 of them.
So next is, I guess, my new favorite card, everyone's new favorite card, Ugin, Eye of the Storms. We've talked a lot about this card on the channel. This has become like my personality the last few Eldrazi videos. So has Ugin impressed you as much as it has impressed kind of everyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest and transparent. I initially wasn't very high on Ugin and Eldrazi ramp. I wasn't sure where it kind of fit into the mana curve because, yes, it's 7 mana, but most often we're casting things with Eldrazi Temple instead. So initially, I wasn't really sold on it. I kind of tried as a one-of. I was like, kind of okay. Then at one point, it kind of just clicked. I went, oh, no, we do these at all points in time. And it actually comes from a really unintuitive place in that it is a fantastic mirror breaker on top of everything else that it does. Yes, it is basically a better Devour of Destiny, which you'll note is currently not in my list. But it is also a fantastic mirror breaker, as in the mirror, it's kind of hard to get Planeswalkers off the board. And with Ugin, it only takes 2 turns to basically get its ultimate and then win the game from there. So also from just the mirror perspective, I think if you are not running Ugin and your opponent is, you're in a bad position. So I would definitely recommend at least 2 Ugin, maybe even 3. But personally, I think the sweet spot is 2.
So in the mirror, this doesn't have any targets, but it wins the game in 2 turns. Is that kind of what the deal is?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you cast Ugin, and let's say at the very least you exile Utopia Sprawl, then that's fantastic. If you exile even nothing, and you're kind of sitting there staring at each other, sure, they might have a Karn the Great Creator, or you might have your card, and you're kind of sitting there, if you're Eldrazi, just sitting there looking at each other, and you're both top decking. Ugin's the best card to find every single time, the best card to resolve. A, you're drawing cards, and then B, after 2 turns, you can ult it and just take over the game. You land all your Eldrazi, you get rid of all their lands, and you Emrakul to take control of their turn and attack in with their own creatures into your blockers. So I think, realistically speaking, as it used to be, whoever resolved Karn first most often won because of liquid metal coating. Now Ugin kind of adds that similar feeling of whoever resolves Ugin first and has enough blockers to get it to its ult faster is also going to win the game. So I think it is just a fantastic mirror breaker in being able to draw you extra cards, get some extra gas in those kind of dirtily games where you're both just staring at each other. Then after 2 turns, ulting, placing your entire deck on board, and of course taking control of the turn if you're playing Emrakul, or potentially maybe exiling their board with a Ulamog, as I'll definitely be attempting to do with the Fanatic of Ronus list.
Yeah, 100% agree with all that. The final creature we have is the kind of original main payoff here, Emrakul the Promise End. Any notes about this, or it's just basically our top end, what we can ramp into? We can just fill our yard, try to get this as fast as possible. I've had this card down as early as turn 4, I think, casting it for 6 mana, and that's like a real thing.
Yeah, I mean, Emrakul has always been a favorite of mine. Taking control of your opponent's turn is always just kind of a neat little thing you can do, unless it's a control deck, in which case, like, okay, how many counter spells can I counter with counterspell? The cool thing about Emrakul, as you said, most often get it down in turn 4. I mean, you can get it down as early as turn 3 if you line things up correctly. I think most often that can be accomplished in the Airgast version of Eldrazi ramp. But even in this version, since you play Planeswalkers and have access to 8 types, I mean, a good Malevolent Rumble can just get you there with a turn 3 Emrakul. And I mean, your opponents can't really do too much about a 13/13 pro instant on turn 3. Of course, Solitude and Leyline Binding, good answers, but even that, kind of hard pressed to say much about that when you can get this down as early as turn 3 or turn 4.
And then finally, we have Kozilek's Command, which this has to be, I mean, again, this is another card people just despise, and it's insane. I don't even know. Like, I have no words.
I mean, Kozilek's Command's kind of interesting because, I mean, it is arguably the best command that ever printed. It's a Kindred instant, which is really important to note for those who are not familiar. Kindred does count as its own card type, hence it does count for 2 types towards Emrakul or Delirium if you do run Shifting Woodlands, for example. But I mean, it is pretty much mana neutral, if not mana positive, every time when it comes to spawns. It allows you to scry and draw, allows you to exile both creatures on board as well as cards in graveyard. There's not too much more to say about it. It just does everything you need it to do. And much like Mega Spawn, kind of that glue that keeps the deck together. I think between Kozilek's Command and Soin Mega Spawn, without these 2 cards working in conjunction with one another, I mean, I don't know if the deck would function as well as it does.
Yeah, it definitely wouldn't be nearly as good. Like these just pair so well together, and just the flexibility behind Kozilek's Command. You never want to see it on the other side. You get such like a huge sigh of like, ugh, they have it when they're tapping out, and you're like, K command for 10, like scry 10, make 10 mana. It's like, that's literally the game. It's just win the game pretty much almost.
Yep. No, most often than not, if you let a large Kozilek's Command resolve, that is, as you said, quite literally the game. Because yeah, if you look through a fourth of your deck and you don't find your finisher, then I mean, that's just some bad luck on your part.
Exactly. So that is the main deck. We'll briefly go over the sideboard. We are a Karn deck, so we have a lot of Karn sideboard cards, but I'm just going to run through these and then we can discuss them if we need to. Consign to Memory, mainly for the mirror, but this can also come in against Amulet Titan. I usually just bring it against Amulet Titan. The mirror affinity is so-so, Storm is so-so. Do we ever bring it in against anything else important?
Yeah, I would say something that was important but isn't as prevalent right now is probably Blink. Some really cool tech against Blink because a lot of people do forget those reflexive triggers off of Felia or Flickerwisp, for example, can lead to some interesting interaction with Consigned Memory because if you do counter that reflexive trigger, then that card just stays in exile, right? So Consign actually a fantastic card into Blink if it was played more. With its play rate being down, not as relevant. Of course, as you mentioned, Eldrazi Tron, Eldrazi Ramp. I think the only other one that I actually bring it into is Living End. Again, for those triggers where you can counter a Cascade trigger, it can be relevant in that regard.
And then also, I forgot to, what about Domain? It counters Leyline Binding, Scion. I think that's pretty good, right?
It's something that I don't bring in as often into Zoo, but definitely could see the argument for, because like they have enough, monocolored spells and non-ETB triggers where it's like, sometimes it's a dead card, sometimes it's not. So could definitely see the argument. I don't personally, but I'm gonna have to give that some more thought.
Okay. And then we have 2 Dismember, bring this in for aggro decks against Amir, against Energy, against Zoo, just like heavy creature matchups.
Yeah, pretty much if it's not straight up combo, you're bringing in Dismember because they're likely to play, whether it be Harbinger of the Flood, whether it be, Emery, Tamio, Ragavan. There's just so many priority targets in the meta right now where you just need it dead for 1 mana or more if you can, pay for the black mana of Pajuka Bog or Utopia Sprawl. But Dismember, I think, has been and will continue to be a mainstay in pretty much any big mana deck, whether that be Eldrazi Ramp, Eldrazi Tron, or otherwise.
Yeah, I definitely run this in Eldrazi Tron too. Like a lot of decks just run it main, especially if they're like aggro creature decks. They just want to get in all the damage. 1 mana, you're taking 4 life, and it usually doesn't matter if you're just kind of winning the game anyway. We have our 4th K return. We talked about that for Energy, all the aggro decks. And then we have 3 Soulless Jailer. So I love Soulless Jailer. We don't have any targeted graveyard hate that removes cards from the graveyard, but this we'd bring in against Storm, any graveyard decks. You bring this in against Amulet.
Yeah, Amulet Titan. Amulet Titan is kind of a misunderstood deck, except for those that play it. I also pilot Amulet Titan, where Amulet Titan used to win solely off the back of Titan. They used to have the OTK with Keswick Wolf Run, as well as Hainward Battlements. But now with Aftermath Analyst and Lumra kind of being the main focus of their combo, Soulless Jailer actually does a lot to slow them down because they're not able to loop Aftermath Analyst, not able to loop Lumra. The Lumra's kind of fallen out of favor. And so while Amulet Titan still acts as that bridge, they're no longer able to win on the spot. So at the very least, Soulless Jailer, if they do get a Titan down, then becomes a target for Boseiju. So a really good card into Titan, in my opinion. As well as you mentioned, anything that focuses in on whether it be cards coming out of exile, like Belcher with Lotus Bloom, or Ruby Storm with their Impulse Draws, and of course, anything with graveyard-centric decks, whether it be Goryo's Vengeance, Kethis Combo, Living End. So a lot of good matchups where Soulless Jailer sees a lot more benefit than, let's say, 3 Stone Brains instead, where a lot of these decks have a lot of redundancy now, and so it can be kind of difficult to pull out that core card because now they have 2-3 backups or just a really strong backup mid-range game plan. One thing I will actually note that I did learn recently that some people might not know about is in the control matchup, Soulless Jailer is actually really good, and it might seem unintuitive, and it's because of Scepter. So with Scepter Lock with Orange Chant, since the copy is a card that's in exile, it's being cast from exile, so they're not actually able to Scepter Lock if Jailer is on board. So just a little bit of deck tech that I learned about recently and would hate for someone not to know about.
That's actually really interesting. I never really thought about that. My first instinct would be like, it's either like Karn or bust, but if you can land Soulless Jailer and kind of get under that lock, that's pretty effective. And then for our Karn board, so we start with Soulless Jailer. We're going to bring these in, even though we have Karn, and we're most likely bringing these in because we already have a Tormod's Crypt. So I think leaving Crypt in the sideboard for a free graveyard hate, like we have 3 Karn, we can get that for free there. And then Chalice of the Void, Engineered Explosives, Ensnaring Bridge, Stone Brain, Coding, and then Crypt. Anything you want to talk about specifically with those, or kind of intuitive in terms of when we bring them in, or if we bring them in, actually?
Yeah, I mean, pretty intuitive, all things considered. Most times you're not bringing in any of the artifacts outside of Soulless Jailer. There are some unique scenarios like Titan, like Ruby Storm, where you do need to bring in some extra pieces just because those decks are a little bit too fast to rely on Karn. But for the most part, pretty intuitive. Though some cool, interesting things to always keep in mind is that you can always pay extra mana, whether that be for Chalice of the Void or even Engineered Explosives, even if it is the same color for Sunburst, to get to 7 to trigger Sanctum of Ugin. So those X modular spells like Chalice and Engineer Explosives are kind of important, as Sanctum of Ugin can be triggered, and you can always grab then another creature or another key spell for the matchup.
Yeah, it's definitely good tech to know, because that specifically is not always intuitive.
Yeah, and I think the only thing to otherwise mention, local metal coating, of course, is well known to Interactive Karn. One thing to also note, though, is that it plays extremely well with Worldbreaker as well, because Worldbreaker can exile any artifact, enchantment, or land. If you do make any permanent into an artifact, then Worldbreaker just becomes exile any target permanent on board, which is a cool little bit of interaction that a lot of people do forget about.
All right, so that was part 1 of the Teach Me Magic series featuring Eldrazi Ramp. Before you click the link for part 2, where we run this deck through a league, I want to talk to you about becoming a YouTube channel member. Once you join my channel, you'll get access to a lot of cool perks, like loyalty badges, cool emotes, and early access to videos like this one. Lastly, we are a Mana Traders content creator, so if you want to save up to 25% on your first subscription, all the information is in the description below. See you in part 2.